Hi, Rob here from Bike Flash. We're here with another quick look at the reasons for taking a real read either via OBD or via the bench as opposed to relying on virtual reads, particularly when the cars arrive with problems already. So this is a 1.6 TDI Volkswagen Golf Mark 6 with the PCR 2.1 engine ECU. Flex was used on this, which supports a real OBD read and a virtual OBD read. And in this case, we had both files read from the vehicle so we could compare the two. On the left-hand side, we've got the original file, which is the known original because this was a virtual read, so it's an original from the Flex server. On the right-hand side, we've got the real read from the vehicle, again done via Flex OBD. Obviously, some ECUs won't support this, you'd have to bench them, but obviously cases vary. And we can see that it's nearly stock, but it isn't quite. There's the two checksum changes at the top, which is normal because it's been modified. And then there's two other bits of data here and here that have been modified as well. And these are fault code removals. You've got 182D9E and 182DCA. So I made a note of those two addresses earlier where these changes are, and these are the two DTCs that have been removed. What gets interesting with this vehicle is it came in with no engine light, no fault codes, but it was incredibly slow. It would rev to just over 2000 RPM. It had very little horsepower. It was barely drivable, which is what originally made us suspect something's happened with this. And by taking a real read, we can see what's gone on. And it also means that not using a virtual read, we're not going to reinstate these and cause a problem for the customer later on. If we'd have used a virtual read straight down the plug, it's quite probable that there was an engine light. It may have come on a few miles later. The customer's going to come back. You've tuned my vehicle, there's now an engine light on. Whereas in fact, the reason is the two fault codes here and here were removed previously and you weren't aware of it. So let's have a look at what these codes are, because that's the interesting bit. As I said, I made a note of what these two addresses are. So instead of comparing this real read to the original file, we have, I'm going to close this down, a good map pack for this ECU. It's not quite the same software version, but it's close enough that we can make a comparison. So if we link these two together, and we've now got the map pack here and the original virtual read here. If we go to the first address that was modified, we line these two up, we can see that this address that was modified is this one here, which is a failure class, so it's a fault code removal. And we can see that it was a failure class for this here. So I'm going to copy that there, open this up, and we can see that this failure class is for this DTC table here. If we display that in a readable way, we can see that as 242A as an OBD code, which P242A is an exhaust gas temperature sensor circuit, bank 1 sensor 3. And then if we go to the other address, which is that one there, we have this failure class, so another DTC removal. Copy and paste that, have a look at what that is, and that one is P246E. And if we have a look at that again, 246E, exhaust gas temperature sensor circuit bank 1 sensor 4. When the vehicle was live dated, where both of these sensors don't work, it was reading 1000 degrees on both of these exhaust gas temperature sensors. The result of that being the vehicle is now very slow because it's pulling all the fuel out of itself because it thinks the exhaust is melting. Just silly really, because it now goes to the garage and nobody can diagnose it. The car's not throwing faults. they're just not codes that you would ever remove unless you were doing something like a DPF removal for race use, in which case you would want to take these out, but you would also want to disable those sensors reading a really high value, because otherwise the car's going to be slow. So there is a way to map these out sort of properly if you weren't using them, but obviously they're needed for DPF. But if you were going to go down that route, then we can map them out properly. But just removing the fault codes is not a good idea. And this is also a lesson really if you're dealing with customer vehicles, is use DTC removal sparingly, because as you can see in this case, we've removed the DTCs. We haven't, whoever did this file did. It hasn't solved the problem. If anything, not faulting the sensors is causing the ECU not to assume a default value. You would probably find that with the fault codes present, this vehicle would actually drive better. It would have a fault code and engine light, but it may go to an assumed temperature value that's sort of hot but not 1,000 degrees. Sometimes you can remove a fault code and the result is it now cannot fault a sensor, and it will instead trust the sensor, and the 1,000 degree reading is now correct in inverted commas, and you've actually made the vehicle worse. So use fault code removal sparingly. If we have a look through the map pack a bit further, just as a sort of insight into modifications, if we were removing these sensors, what we would actually want to do is look at these conversion maps for the temperature. So if we were mapping these out, what you've got here is obviously the voltage returned by the sensor, going from 0 to 3.3 volts on this, and then an associated temperature in degrees. So obviously with no voltage coming back, or obviously that's the minimum that this is scaled to, there's your 1,000 degrees. If we were removing these, we would rescale this, and we would, we could have this reading say 500 degrees, which is below the exhaust gas temperature limit, and that would be a way of tuning this out. You'd probably do it a bit nicer than that. We'd take it all the way down to there, but yeah, you get the idea that there's a very big difference between mapping something out correctly and then just disabling a P code and sending the car out the door. There's now no fault code and no diagnostic. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that little look into what we found on this customer's Golf that had been to somewhere else before, and also just a little insight into the difference between a P code removal and mapping something out. See you on the next one.